Hey, it's me, Rosie Bitts, and I'm here with you this week with a tantric tip. So I have changed the name of this little corner to be called Tantric Tips with Rosie Bitts rather than just sexy tips, because I wanted to widen what I could talk about. Some of these tips are definitely going to be sexy, lots of sexiness, but I also want to be able to talk about all the other things I geek out about, like spirituality and the intersection of spirituality and creativity and sexuality and meditation and all the good stuff that Tantra means to me. So we are starting into the world of Tantra. Hey! And for our first week this week, I am going to give you some tips on what women want. So that's kind of interesting. Can I actually tell you what women want? Fuck no. No, 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 no. And if anybody claims that they can tell you exactly what women want, I don't think they really know what they're talking about, because women are unique and individual and have a variety of different needs and wants. Can I give you some ideas to bring to your partner and communicate about? Yes, I am very, very well versed because I've worked with hundreds of women to tell you, to give you a perspective on what they may want. So let's go into the first little tip, communication. Oh, we want some communication. And even if we say we don't, we actually really do. This is the truth. I think this is the truth of all people, women or men. We want to be communicated with. We want actually for you to talk to us so that you can figure out what we as individuals do want. Now, this has really been coming up for me this week. The reason why this is on my brain is I've been seeing, and I've seen it for years, but for whatever reason it's bugging me this week. I've seen lots of posts around Tantra that talk about men getting into their masculine and being dominant and fierce and really like taking over with a woman, and the woman just being in her receptive. And I just really, unless it is explored and also explained with a lot of nuance, that's a recipe for some really like unhealthy dynamics. From my point of view, that's some bullshit. Do I want, when I'm interested in, I'm a pansexual, so I love all humans. When I'm working directly with somebody with heavy male energy, who's really dominant male energy, or who is actually a cisgendered man, I want them to be self-confident, absolutely. But I want them to communicate with me. I don't want them to ever assume that they would know what I want or need without talking to me. And I think it should go both ways. So that's my first tip. And I think this idea that's being portrayed that men should just know, I'm talking basically, from a heteronormative perspective right now, but that men should just know and then go in and take what they want, it's bullshit, and it can be extremely dangerous, right? That's where we come to this gray area where men are expected to act in a certain way, and so they go ahead and act in that way, and it can end up in a sexual assault or a rape, or at the very least doing something that is against the other person's consent, because you haven't had that conversation about consent. So communication, number one. Number two, consent, right? Communicate. Hey, would you like me to kiss you? Hey, I'm really enjoying our interaction. Can I sit closer to you? How does it feel if I put my hand on your leg, right? If you know the person fairly well, you don't always have to get verbal consent. You can, see what's happening. You can hear the sounds they're making. You can do like things like this, right? Like, hey, is that okay? But if you don't know them well, yeah, you want some verbal consent. You want that verbal communication that's gonna lead into a conversation around consent. And number one, oh my gosh, please, 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 when I am involved with cisgendered men, how sexy is it when they understand what a conversation about consent means? I'm just dumbstruck by how many men don't have this language. And so if you're a cisgendered man, please Google that shit, send me a message, ask people. But I would say before you ask a woman or a queer person, Google it, because there's great videos on consent culture. You can look this up. So the next thing we want to be in a conversation about consent so that everything that happens between us is consensual. And let me tell you, the best, hottest, dirtiest, most spiritually enlivening sex happens in a place where there is deep levels of consent and communication. You really can't go you cannot go to these types of levels that I personally want to go and am going to without that communication and that consent, right? It's integral to that experience. So if you want to have the hottest sex of your life, communication, consent. Okay, the next thing, self-confidence. So I talked about this just in one of my last videos. How sexy is it when people have been working on themselves, right? When they have some emotional insight, when they also, so not just like working on yourself, yes, absolutely, number one, foundational, work on yourself, because that is fucking sexy. But number two, that self-confidence also comes from, like, you can read and explore and look into this stuff. So when I meet somebody and they like feel good in their skin, they're confident in who they are, right? And not from like a narcissistic perspective, but just truly they're comfortable in who they are. They're living their dreams and their passions. I'm very attracted to that. So, and that's like a distinction. So what I'm seeing coming up in a lot of tantric work is this idea of men who are domineering, right? Who are dominant or domineering, who will claim the woman. Like I just read a post the other day, and man, it just like, I saw red flags everywhere, where it was a woman talking about the first time she met with her partner, and she was sitting in another man's lap, and the man who became her partner came up to her and just said confidently, "Kiss me." And it sounded through the post that she'd only met him one other time. There was zero consent. She was sitting in somebody else's lap. There was no consent by that gentleman. This man just came up and said, "Kiss me," gave her no ability to really consent other than to be like, "Oh, fuck no." Right? And her reaction was, he was so self-confident, I could do nothing but obey, which for me, that's fucking problematic, right? That's not self-confidence, that's arrogance. That's arrogance, and that's moving into a realm where you are treading very could be dark territory, where you're doing things that are non-consensual. What if that woman has a history of abuse and she immediately froze and didn't know what to do and kissed him out of obligation, which happens to a lot of people, right? When they're met with that type of dominant behavior, and without a conversation of consent or an understanding or laying the groundwork with that individual, they can freeze. That's a really normal response for somebody with trauma. So difference between domineering, dominant, and confidence. Confidence, let's go back to that scenario. So for me, if I was in that scenario, what it would look like, I could be sitting in some other dude's lap having a great time, and this other guy who's attracted to me and I'm attracted to comes over and he's like, "Hey, I am loving your vibe." And he looks up at the person that I'm sitting, "Hey, is it okay if we have a little interaction, like the three of us, and just talk, because like I'm feeling something great happening over here. Do you guys mind if I sit down with you and connect?" That would give some opportunity for consent. That would be somebody who has self-confidence and came into the situation with confidence, but without dominance or domineering, and it would leave an open-ended situation. So rather than going for something sexual immediately, it would be like, "I love the vibe that's happening over here. Can I sit down with you guys? Can I explore?" It's a state of non-attachment. Maybe something sexy will happen, maybe it won't. Maybe we'll become friends. Maybe the three of us will have a great conversation. Do you see what I mean? So yes, please understand the difference between self-confidence and all those other things. Okay, next tip. I love this one. I'm so excited to share this one. Get to know a woman's body before you make love to her. So holy moly, I have been so lucky to lately, my last couple of lovers that I've had, both have been really, they're such inspired lovers. They have like read, watch shows, taking courses about sexuality. They know about female genitalia, like they know all the ins and outs. They know about the female reproductive system. So they actually have had an incredible knowledge that they could bring to the table when we start to make love. And via communication and consent, and the fact that they also bring these skills and this knowledge, we really quickly could explore some, like, taking me to some very deep levels of pleasure. And man, is that sexy and satisfying and mind-blowing. I've never had men like this who have already on their own, without me having to lead them in any way, have gone to explore all these realms of pleasure for a woman and then come to me and are like, hey, let's see how your body works. Let's see how your body reacts. Tell me what feels good to you, what feels sexy. It's incredible. It's empowering. And when you mix that, like I said, with the consent and that communication, then, you know what, then I, as a woman, can open into my receptivity, into my feminine nature. And as a woman, I don't just have to be in the feminine, but if I choose to, I can open into the feminine nature and be receptive to the pleasure that these men who are very adept could give me. So if you only have your knowledge of sex via porn, via what you learned in high school, you need to do some work. And you know what? You're not the only one. Many people stop there and then they do the sex thing and they think, well, I make her come, so that's good. She says it's okay. I think it's okay. No, you know what? You can do more. And it's not just for her. Because when you are bringing her to heights of pleasure and she is having multiple orgasms and she's losing her mind and she's coming for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, you know what? You are getting the direct benefit of that pleasure. And let me tell you, it is not just going to be one way. You are going to get all that energy, probably a huge amount of pleasure yourself. So go in and learn. And it is so gratifying to me when I can be with a lover who not just knows around, has an idea about erogenous zones and what might turn me on and ways to actually manipulate my body to bring me pleasure, but also understands my reproductive system. So we can talk about condoms, we can talk about STI testing, we can talk about where I am in my cycle so that we can make sure that I am, that we are being together responsible for the potential of reproduction that could happen through our sexual encounter, rather than me as a woman having to take it on 100% by myself, or the man just slapping on a condom and thinking, well, I'm done with it. No, there's much more going on there. So get to know all these juicy things. And if you're a lady, into ladies listening to this, you may not even know. We are not taught about our sexual or reproductive system, really barely at all. So get in there as well. This goes for anybody. But I think men especially are not given this information. And then I would say the last little tip that I have for you about what women want is to show up with an open heart. Right? Show up with an open heart. We do not want those dudes or those butch ladies or those femme gals or those trans folk or those non-binary folk who show up, show some interest, and then ghost us when we text them, just to, lead us along so that we would be more interested, right? Or who take a step back emotionally as soon as we get romantically inclined. Show up with your full open heart. You know what? You've done all the investigation, you've had that communication, you've had the consent conversation and created the foundation so that you know this is a person to invest in romantically or in partnership wise or whatever. But let's say just even to make love, show up with an open heart. Go to that person with an open heart. As a woman, yeah, I want that, especially from my cisgendered men. I want to feel their love and their connection, even if we're just spending one night together. I want to know that I can connect deeply with their heart. And honestly, I don't make love with people where that's not something that's part of the situation. I just don't. I'm not interested in it anymore. So there you go. That gives you some tips on what women want. Go out, talk to some ladies, see if it's true. Bring information back. If you're a lady, tell me the things that you're like, oh, hell no, I don't want that. Or, oh, yes, I want this. Because again, we're individuals. So it's all about communication and finding out what each individual lady wants. Okay, hope that was helpful and informative. I love you, and I will see you next week.